Welcome to BYOB podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Ford, and today we have a very, very long-term client of mine, a friend that I consider, a mentor and someone who I go to for advice. His name's Michael Kenihan, and he's a consultant, an author, done many businesses, and currently is running a business called MK Healthcare Consulting. And we'd like to welcome him to the show. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks. And all of that's true. Yes, I have been a client of Andy's as well as being an advisor mentor too. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So recently we worked with you to write this book that I just happen to have here, which is very, thick and well thumbed. And we will talk into the health practitioner's journey in the future and your consulting business, but just give people a flavor of what you're doing right now. And then we're going to delve back into how you managed to set up your own portfolio business.
I've had a long career. I started as a physiotherapist. I won't go into that background, but then got involved in running sports medicine and physio businesses, operating, owning, developing, and then left that in 2017. And for the last 5-6 years, I've been working half-time running a stem cell business, Melbourne Stem Cell Centre and Magellan Stem Cells, looking at how stem cells can be used for the treatment of osteoarthritis. Now, that takes up 40% of my time. The rest of the time I spend consulting with clients who come to me either as individuals, as practitioners in their own practice or in group practices, or wanting to develop or go into a practice. So at every level, from the notion of becoming more commercially savvy to actually running a business operation involving employing people and running practices for profit. So I've more recently also then, of course, during COVID, I did some courses like everybody did, and the idea of writing a book came to mind, and I started that process 3 years ago, and the book was published last year that you've just held up with a beautiful front cover.
And so you've had a long career and you're still going as strong as ever. But I wanted to take you back because I'm really interested in what makes people, qualified and the motivation to go off and run a portfolio business. So my favorite question is, what was your first job? The first job you got paid for? It could have been a paper round, lemonade stand, your first gig. Way back when.
Yeah, actually, funny you say that. The first job I ever had was actually working at the Australia Post. Wasn't even called it back in those days. As a holiday job, I used to go and deliver the mail from the post office to the houses, particularly over the summer period before Christmas when everybody used to send letters out. So, and then I did that and then got involved as a part-time sorter of the mail in the mail centre as well as delivering it. So I used to put the mail on the bike, ride the bike around, and it used to pay, back in those days, because we were fortunate to not have to pay for our tertiary education, it actually funded some of my activities during the year when I was studying physiotherapy. So
how old were you when you were doing that?
Probably 17, 18.
Yeah, healthy way to earn a living.
Well, my wife will tell me that she had her first job when she was 11, so I certainly didn't do that. So maybe I was a bit privileged by not having to work until then.
Yeah. Well, I did. I was talking to my best mate who I had dinner with last night, and we were talking about the paper rounds we used to do when we were in primary school, and 6 days a week, get up at 5 a.m., run Harlow Shine. It was like, and now they use couriers to actually deliver newspapers. So the world's changed a lot since those days. So.
Well, funnily enough, I did sell newspapers on the corner of Norwood Parade for a fellow I knew called Mario Bugner, who used to have the round, and when he was sick or couldn't do it, I used to do that for him, standing on the corner, and the cars would drive through the intersection, stop, give you the 10 cents for the newspaper, and you give them the newspaper. It would so not happen today because it'd be so dangerous, but
yeah. I see it overseas.
Yeah, it still goes on. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay, so then you obviously studied physiotherapy at Melbourne?
University of South Australia.
University of South Australia. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your sort of initial foray into practice and working.
Something that you can't do as easily now. I worked at the Royal Adelaide Hospital for my first job for a year as a physiotherapist, doing the different rotations through the hospital from outpatients to respiratory to neuro to intensive care. And that was a great learning experience and a great opportunity to meet other professions at that time. But more importantly, During that time, there was a postgraduate course being operated in the facility where the physio school was, and I befriended a fellow who became a great mentor for me who was studying a postgraduate course in physiotherapy. And it was he that took me out of that environment into private practice the following year. And he's probably my first professional mentor, Tony, who became not just a mentor, but a best man and a godfather to my son.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. Was that Lifecare that you went into at that stage?
No,
Or was that
that was
free?
that was a new clinic called Adelaide Sports Sciences Clinic, which was in Hindmarsh in Adelaide, and that was the first multidisciplinary centre attached to a hospital in Australia.
Wow.
So I had an early introduction to working with sports doctors, orthopaedic surgeons, and other disciplines, as well as physical educationists, because we had a really good gym with this whiz-bang new equipment from America called Nautilus. So that was an incredible learning experience.
Very lucky.
And it really set me on a path to what I then did by meeting opportunistic. And opportunistic is, I'm a big believer that luck is actually recognition of opportunity. And I went to a conference in Hawaii and was roomed with a doctor from Melbourne who I got to know well. He said, "Oh, you should come and do this in Melbourne. You know, there's a little hospital I know with a nurse's house next door. We could set the clinic up in the nurse's house." And that's it. With the guy I just mentioned before, that's exactly what we did. We then started a clinic in Melbourne, and within 6 months, I'd moved to Melbourne to work with that group full time.
Wow. That's a big move.
I was only 2 years out.
Yeah. So when was your athletic career? Because I do want to touch on that a little bit.
Look, the sad part of my athletics career was that it was so short, because I was the state high jump champion at age 17, held the record, and actually had the potential to be a high jumper of international standard, but I injured my ankle. And those who've been around for a long time may know that a fellow called Dick Fosbury developed the Fosbury flop way back in Mexico in 1968. And there was nobody doing it at that time because I was a straddler. So I taught myself how to do the Fosbury flop with no coaching. And it turns out that the technique I had when I planted my foot was the wrong technique that they don't use now. And I injured my ankle, and I wasn't able to high jump after I turned 18 at all.
Wow.
So it was like, what am I going to do? I want to work in sport. And someone said, "Oh, you should do physio because they're going to be working with athletes, and that could be one way of satisfying that desire." So that was part of that journey. But I like to tell people I could have been the world champion if I hadn't got injured.
Of course. It's always good of it. Potential.
Potential, yes.
Yeah. So you're in Melbourne running the clinic, and how long did you run that for? Sounds like it was successful.
Well, we were a group of 5 owners at that time: doctors, physiotherapists, podiatrist, accountant. We always had a business partner who was also involved with that business. And I was working there full time as a clinician, and the doctor who'd been the manager of the clinic decided he wanted to go overseas and leave. And the other partner said, "Oh, well, you should do his job, Michael." I said, "Well, what do you mean? I've never done this before." "Yeah, but you're a good bullshitter and you're a good talker, and you got a few clues." And that was actually how I became a manager of that clinic. And then we built that clinic up to being a significant practice and started another 4 sports medicine centres in Melbourne. We had a stable of 5 clinics that we developed from greenfield status, from scratch. And we built up the number of clinicians, and many of those clinicians are well known in the industry even now as early luminaries in sports medicine. And the building up of those clinics, again, this is about opportunity. Lifecare Health had floated on the Australian stock market in 1999, and they were looking for a beachhead, a decent clinic group in the eastern states because they were based in Western Australia. And they found us and talked to us, and eventually they ended up buying those 5 clinics. And that's how I then went into the corporate world, because once again they said, "Oh, well, you've been running these clinics, you must know something." No qualifications in these areas, of course. "So will you manage the the business in the eastern states for us. Okay, all right, I'll do that. And jumping into the deep end is one way to learn, because there were no real course opportunities, Andy, in business administration or any of those sorts of things. So I was learning on the job. It was dealing with lawyers, accountants, marketing people, and learning from them some of the skills that you could then apply to what you did. And
Mm.
all of this learning, experiential learning, which we all know is so important to having a holistic view to what you do, put me in good stead to then do a bit of jumping up the corporate ladder. And Lifecare then merged with another company, and I came across a very imposing managing director who was actually a corporate consultant, and he taught me a lot in the noughties about formalizing things like KPIs and measurement and proper marketing, and how you went about setting up vision, mission, values for businesses, and so on. So I learned a lot from him at that time as well.
Mm. No, you seem to have a lot of luck getting good mentors. That's a bit of a skill set on its own, I think.
I think that someone asked me this the other day, and I was able to identify a mentor from school who was my athletics coach, actually. A mentor from the early business who was a accountant who used to say to me, Michael, you need to get involved in businesses you can own that make money for you while you're asleep, which was very good advice. To this corporate consultant who was a bit of a bully, but he was a great teacher, and I sucked up everything I could from him. To someone I've still worked with now who's also an accountant, who's a man of great wisdom, who I still use as a mentor today. So I often say to young people that you will have different mentors as you move through your career. You will have a mentor that's right at the time. I mentioned Tony, my best man, before. He was the right man at the right time. And he also knew, he said, Mike, I don't think there's anything more I can teach you. You need to sort of move on and explore other things. So being a mentor is as much about letting your people go off and find somebody else as much as it is knowing yourself when you need to get somebody who's got a different skill set that can help you. And I talk a
Well,
lot about that in my book, actually, Andy, as you would know.
yeah. And they say that, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And I think you're open to being mentored, and you exhibit the behaviors mentors like in their mentees, which is enthusiasm, curiosity, willing to listen, so it goes both ways, I think. And so
I agree.
you obviously were ready for that. So you're learning a lot through this process of being.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. You almost went from, well, you did go from a business owner into an employee and then out to a business owner again, which is, how did you find that transition? Was it hard having a boss?
Well, yeah, look, you really hit the nail on the head there, because although the guy I mentioned before, I won't say his name because he might still be around and think I'm talking about him negatively, but I have great affection for him, although he was a difficult person to work with. But I found that being employed, particularly in a corporate environment, they often say that if the corporates pay you enough, they own you. And had to be available 24/7. You really had to follow a mantra. The companies were listed, so every month would be this exhaustive process of going through the numbers, trying to improve the numbers. He was always talking to shareholders. You always had to be acquiring businesses and growing to be a corporate. Hasn't changed, actually. But I found that stifling, and I couldn't actually wait to get out and be my own person, responsible for my own agenda, for what I earned, basically being from my own energy and expertise rather than having it thrust upon me by others. And that I actually, to be honest with you, I found the process of doing that liberating rather than, I found it stifling to be employed by someone. I think
Mm.
too much of a free spirit, too much of wanting to run my own agenda, I think, which is really what I've done for the last, 12 to 15 years, pretty much.
Yeah. And I think, though, I mean, it's got its pros and cons, but you would have learned a lot, which would have helped you in the other businesses you've run since, I'm sure. So,
Oh, no question. I couldn't have done that if I hadn't learnt those things. But I think it's all about a recognition of I'm ready. I think I know enough
yeah.
to move forward, and trusting yourself and having that self
Mm,
belief is really important too.
mm, mm. And we met when you were still at Lifecare running the business, and I was still working corporate when we started doing a little bit of work together, and that continued on through various businesses. But I also wanted to touch on the outside of work things that you've done, Sports Medicine Australia and those sorts of things, because I believe they're mostly voluntary roles, but you still managed to find the time while you're raising family and running the business. So do you want to touch on some of those things and the importance of maybe being a part of associations and the industry and giving back?
Look, I think that's really important. I think that a lot of the colleagues I've made and opportunities that I've had come my way have been through meeting people through those environments. I mean, Sports Medicine Australia, back to my mentor, Tony said to me, Mike, you've got to join Sports Medicine Australia. If you're going to be in sports medicine, they're the place to be. So I really went through roles of being state president in Victoria for SMA. I then became on the national board. I became the national president of SMA, and learning, you're meeting people from all the different disciplines. So you're learning about nutrition, and you're learning about exercise, and you're learning about science, which are things that in your own profession you don't get that wide variety of knowledge and opportunity. And that created opportunities in sport. I was a physio at Richmond Football Club. That came through connections who recommended me. I had opportunities to go and be involved internationally through Sports Medicine Australia with the International Sports Medicine Federation called FIMS. And funnily enough, then that led to, because of my long history with SMA, they twice approached me to actually be the chief executive after losing their current chief executives. So I became an operator of the business as much as a president of the business. So that was because they all knew me, they knew my track record, they knew what I'd done, and they therefore thought, well, hang on, you're dedicated to this organisation, you've proved that through your roles, you've got some business smarts, so you're a logical person that we could ask to do this. So I did it twice, and then I said, because they had two failed new executives, and I said, you better make sure you get it right this time because I'm not coming back a third time. So that was more my affinity with Sports Medicine Australia than my own discipline of physiotherapy. And that's been a lifelong thing, and some of the best colleagues and friends I've made have been through that. So it's not just about opportunity, it's about friendship, it's about networking, it's about expanding your education horizons. And with that comes volunteering, running courses, doing lectures at various topics, going to sporting events to be a physio with other colleagues that you've worked there with. And that really is a really fulfilling part of just giving back to the profession that's actually helped you become commercially successful as well.
Oh, look, I love that. And when I help people transition into, their own portfolio business, sometimes takes a while to scale their business. And I say to them, look, if you've got time, and obviously you've got the smarts and the experience, do things voluntarily, because you've got the time, you want to practice your craft, go and give your time freely to other people and help others, because if you help others, they're going to want to help you. And that's the process. And so don't go and sell, go and help. And then you'll get clients and referrals. And it's obviously you're a testament to that. So when you left Lifecare, tell us a little bit about that, because then you went into some other ventures, and also you obviously started your sort of consulting, and that was during a process when they made some commercial changes. But I want to talk through that, and then did your mind open up? Did you suddenly think of all these things, or were they sort of percolating in the background before you actually made the exit?
Well, look, right back in the early noughties, a young doctor came and worked with us at Lifecare Paran, a sports physician who was doing his training, and he became very interested in interventional medicine, in doing injections and doing different PRPs, a common product that used platelet-rich plasma that's used today. And he came to the clinic, and we actually established a laboratory for him in the practice that he could do his work. And apropos of that, we were approached by a group who was doing stem cell treatment in animals. This was in 2013, 2014. And they said, oh, look, we're looking for a clinic group. And the opportunity was put to Lifecare. It didn't suit Lifecare. But myself and another colleague and this doctor went down the path of being involved with becoming the first place to do stem cell treatment for arthritis in humans, because the people we sided with had done it in the veterinary space for a number of years. So they literally came along and said, look, are you guys interested? And that's a bad thing to say to me, because I thought, hang on, that's pretty interesting. And here's a different
Yeah.
path. And we go and we build a tree, and we go and build a clinic where we're treating people, and we have to develop processes, and we have to look at regulation, and we have to do a whole lot of new things that are exciting and interesting. So Melbourne Stem Cell Centre was born, working with Magellan Stem Cells, which was a laboratory operator. And we're now at the point of doing a phase 3 pivotal trial on the use of stem cells for osteoarthritis. We built a large laboratory down in Brayside, and we're now working with the regulators to get the lab accredited to manufacture cells in a certain process that has to happen for a phase 3 trial. And we're hoping to start that later this year. So that's been a 10-year process. That's with invested capital originally coming from the investors. I'm an investor like several others. And we're now looking for institutional capital to help us take that to the next level. So that was, again, the opportunity was there, and we thought, well, why not give it a go? This is interesting. And that led to me leaving Lifecare, because I couldn't continue to do Lifecare and that activity at the same time. So that was one example, as was getting involved in a tech operation called Are You On Track, which is about the development of an app. This is still an ongoing process. That's been going for 7 years as well, to actually track people's activities and actions that they take to be more healthy, so they get back on track for their whatever it was, post-injury, post-concussion, post-whatever event you've had involvement with. And that tech aspect was interesting as well, because I didn't know anything about tech. In fact, that's to a degree how we ended up using more of your services at Social Star, Andy, because of your ability to teach people social media, which we didn't know anything about either. And that was the pioneering work that you did. But that was, again, meeting you helped consolidate that as a learning experience. So I don't think I go into anything without actually hoping to learn something from the people that are doing different things. And I've learned an enormous amount about what it means to run trials, what it means to work with regulators, both here and overseas. And that's an ongoing activity that I continue to do now.
And that's, to me, it's a testament to the curiosity factor. Like when doctor, who obviously we both know, came to you interested in stem cells, and instead of saying, stop doing that, just treat some hamstrings, you're like, no, we'll open up a lab, we'll make space, we'll develop. And I've seen you do that a lot when you were in your Lifecare days, is in helping people explore. And people might know that we share a common friend in my brother who worked with you for a long time, which is actually how we met. And he went off and developed his own, and you worked with him on his back speciality. So you've got a curious mind, and I think that's one thing that I think served you well. And I think that's a good learning experience for other young people who are listening to the podcast. You've got to have that sort of insatiable, I want to know something, I want to learn something, I want to do something in order to achieve. Because you could have ignored all of those things and then just done your physio business from when you landed from Adelaide, and you would have been successful, but less interesting life, perhaps.
You know, that's interesting, because if you think about it, and one of the reasons in the book we chose the theme of harvesting knowledge as something you do through your career is indicative of that, because the knowledge you gain from each of those ventures you get involved in, you can apply to other opportunities that come your way. And I think I encourage people to do those things, because if they are harvesting the knowledge, that puts them in the position, if the opportunity arises, to take that opportunity, to have the confidence to take it. To go outside your comfort zone is not something for everybody. And you're right, I think it's been a curiosity for me my whole life to try and look at opportunity and how I might be able to. I didn't initially look at it from a point of commercialising it, but there are ways, and you can't commercialise everything, but there are things that you can commercialise. And maybe after this journey, now we haven't made any money out of doing this stem cell operation. It's been something we've done, but that's got the potential to be something that could be really significant in the healthcare sector, because it could change the treatment of osteoarthritis. So there's a visionary thing. And if you can also make that commercial. And one good mentor always said to me, he said, Michael, good medicine is good business. And that was the guys, my current mentor would say that to me. In other words, he'd say it's about the people, Michael.
Yeah.
And medicine and a lot of things, Andy, are about the people at the end of the day.
And look, you're preaching to converted on there. I talk to people all the time, and when I'm coaching my clients, and they're off thinking digital marketing, and I've read a blog, and they've watched a video, and they're talking about funnels and clickbait things, and I'm like, who's your customer? Give me a name. Let's talk about a conversation. Why don't you talk to one of them? That's people buy from people. Companies don't buy anything. People buy from people. And so I think we're losing the humanness in a little bit of, and maybe even in medicine because of the telehealth and the COVID changes to medicine. But I like your sort of approach is if you help patients achieve, then they'll come back, they'll tell their friends, you'll have a good business. And in your book, you talk a lot about how you treat patients, how you make it comfortable for them, how you set up your rooms. And I think those sorts of things, they don't teach them in university. You don't learn those sorts of skills. So maybe it's a good opportunity to pivot to the consulting. And what do you see in the market at the moment with the physio graduates? What are they missing? What do you think that can add value to their careers and livelihoods?
Look, I think the reason that I staged the book the way I did in these 4 stages, from the first of which is clinical excellence, because I believe that you need the technical ability in whatever field you do. Now, that you can gain that by study, but you can also gain that by experience. And one of the things that John, your brother, and I worked out very early in the piece at Lifecare was that graduates were coming out without requisite skills in manual handling and clinical reasoning, which to those who aren't in the field basically means how well can you use your hands to examine somebody, how well can you apply techniques that will help people through mobilization or massage or manipulation, and also how do you look at the information you gain from your consultation to actually reason out what you need to do to help that person improve or get back to what they wanted to do before. So we saw a gap and we started a program called, 2 programs, one called Clinical Reasoning and Manual Handling, the other one called Relationship Marketing Business Development. And those 2 programs, one was a commercial, one was a clinical. We used to teach all of our therapists this. And John had a very strong clinical background, and I'd developed some commercial now. So we developed clinical mentors and commercial mentors that will actually help people on both sides of that career. So the second stage of the book's about commercial success, when you've actually developed that skill set and you have built a list of patients. You then move on to actually owning that list of patients. In other words, whatever you do, people will come to see you because they're coming to see Andy Ford or Michael Kenihan. They're not coming necessarily to the practice. But then how do you expand that out into a commercial business where the goodwill of those clinicians gives you a chance to leverage that list of patients into building a business with those that work with you? So that third stage was around that. And then the fourth stage is, well, what do you do when you've done all this in terms of using the opportunity to sell your business or to gain others to come along or a corporate to be involved? So the book was a very logical thing for me to do based on what I knew. I called it my passion project. I realised that all that accumulated knowledge would be good put down in a book, and thank yourself and Chris Grierson, another relative of Andy's actually, he's got a whole army, really helped me structure what I was going to do, because I think otherwise I would have just produced this great lot of mission, but it wouldn't have been coherent into a structure. So the help that I got doing that was fundamental to getting that done and getting that out, and actually coming out with a book that made sense and could be useful to anyone from the new graduate right through to, well, I'm towards the end of my career. I just mentioned to you before someone I met only recently who said, "Oh, look, I don't know business now. I'm a GP. I go with it. Can I come and get some advice about how I might position myself to actually maximize my equity by selling that business?" So it's a continuum, and I think what I've managed to offer from consulting is to have done most of the things that people need to do. And they'll come up with an issue and I say, "Oh yeah, we did that or we tried that." I don't voice it in those way to people. But the point is, when you've had those experiences and you've seen failure paths and you've seen success paths, you can often direct people down the right path for them. And that's where the consulting, I think, has value for the people that I've engaged with.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, it's every stage, from a student to someone who's working for someone to someone who wants to start their own business to someone to sell. And I refer clients to you who are along those stages, and you've obviously referred clients to me who require the marketing elements. And it's interesting because medical people don't get business training and don't get staff management training and how to deal with various commercial elements. They have to learn on the job. And it can be quite variable when you're focusing on the clinician and the technical capacity. So I think this book sort of fills that gap a lot. And I wonder whether in schools in the future they should teach a bit more of that commercial nous, because as you know, it's your earnings are capped if you're working for somebody else, but running your own practice gives you that capability of expanding your sort of equity stake and your commercial prospects. If you're really good at what you do, that's the way to harvest it in a way. And then you've got something to sell at the end of the day rather than just stopping work. And with the kids staying at home longer and the property prices being high, we need that.
Well, my father was an obstetrician gynecologist, and my dad had a brilliant practice. He was very well guarded. Back in those days, they used to do all the deliveries themselves if they were that specialist. But he ended up just having a building that he operated out of that he could sell. He couldn't sell his practice. He'd never managed to maximise his equity opportunity when he finished his career. And that stuck in my mind because I think that's a particular GP thing. It's why the corporates have been successful buying general practices, because there's been no other way of having an exit. But I think you can set those things up to actually achieve that goal at the end of having an asset. And there's a lot of space for that, to assist people with that. And I think that's going to be even more demand over the coming years, because a lot of the people of my generation are now looking at, well, how do I maximise my equity opportunity? What am I going to do now? Is there another opportunity for me, or do I retire? So there's lots of questions around that. And I think the financial planners aren't answering those questions for those people, to be honest, because they have no experience, I don't think, in many instances. So you're right, and I think the opportunity's there at all those stages of a career process to assist people. And use the expertise of others, and I know that what you run is a business which will help people with social media. It's not my strength. I know there are people that will be very at estate planning. That's not my business. I know there's other people who will also be, teaching people different techniques or using certain equipment. So I'll utilise them in my consulting as well.
And so as you are progressing through your various businesses, you're in tech play, you're in advanced medicine, and you're running a consulting. You just wrote a book. What's next for Michael Kenihan? How are we going to harvest that knowledge you've hard earned over the last 40 years? What's the next phase?
My wife tells me I can't retire, so that's probably a good motivation to keep that
So
going.
she doesn't want you hanging around the house, or because?
No. She's still working as well. We think that if we can provide, if we get satisfaction out of it, we can provide help. We can help people. We can be involved. Gets us motivated. Look, I think my motivation is very much around getting the stem cell project to a level of completion, which is probably another couple of years. Number one. Number two, I'd like to get the book to people to read it and engage with that, and hopefully processes like that. And I also think can lead into other opportunities, such as speaking about what I've done from a career journey, but also from a commercial opportunity viewpoint. I think there's a number of areas I could go with some speaking, and I'd like to do more of that, because up until now I've done a lot of one-on-one, but I'd like to extend that into talking to groups. So I'm really follow up to do some more speaking, to consult with larger groups, to finish a project and push the book out. So they're really they're just four small things I want to try and do, Andy.
But I love that you still got
whatever.
big goals. It's great, and we've been talking about international expansion and opportunities for the books, and I can see it all happening ahead. Let me finish the podcast with one question, which is, imagine there's someone who's 10 years back from you and they're thinking about taking the step, they're working for somebody, they want to start a practice, and you probably get this question often. What's the sort of one piece of advice that you would give to them?
It's okay to consider the risks of doing these things, but don't let your mind get so engorged in the idea of mitigating the risks to the extent whereby you don't take. And I see this continue where people go, but what if it doesn't work? Or what if, the capital I put in, I don't get a return in? But what if? And I'll go, well, I can't immunize you against risk totally. Whatever you do, there's an element of risk. And I think it's sometimes a matter of look at what you think the risks are and then position them in a place of, well, even if all that go wrong, I'm not going to lose my house. I'm not going to lose everything. So I've always looked at these things and talked to Sarah Jane, my wife, about this when I've said, what do you think about this? Well, she was saying to me, well, what's the worst that can happen? And I'll go, this is the worst that will happen, because I've had ventures where I've lost money. Of course I have. That's how you learn. But it hasn't been more than I've been able to afford to lose. So I think really it's about mitigating risk, but it's also about taking action. I think they're the two things that I encourage people to do, and not get caught up on over-analysis. At the end of the day, you have to make a decision.
There's a lot of analysis paralysis, particularly post-COVID. People sort of didn't know what to do because they were uncertain of the environment. And I think that a good coach assists people in, or as a catalyst to helping them take action. Because you're right, it's very difficult to start a business. I mean, it was difficult for me, when I did it, and it wasn't actually a choice. I had a fight with the boss, and and that was it, which happens probably too often. But I mean, your son-in-law, we actually had him on the show, who's transitioned into a finance and mortgage broker, and he told me he did a lot of planning and he sought your counsel before he made his next step, because he's an analytical person. He saw all the risks, but I think you might have guided him. Go, you just got to do it sometimes. You just got to take the step.
It's funny, I didn't know you had him on that show, so there you go. He never told me that.
He talked a lot about you.
So there's something. No, we get on very well.
Okay. So, Michael, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I could actually talk to you for hours, but we'll do that over a wine sometime. Well done on doing the book. I mean, I know I've said that before, but it's, a lot of people talk about it, not many people do it. And capturing a lifetime of knowledge into a really good quality product that's going to help, hundreds, if not thousands of people, I think is a good achievement and a nice way to capstone a brilliant career. So thanks for coming on.
So what's the book look? Can you show me what the book looks like again?
This book?
Yeah.
No, it's a great
Thanks, Andy. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much. And we'll have that